Okay. Hello and welcome to this webinar designed to provide you with tips on how to prepare and present webinars. I'm Peggy Hutchison, a member of the IEEE USA Employment and Career Services Committee and a veteran at pulling together online presentations for lots of different groups. This presentation will provide you with tips on how to prepare for and present your own webinars. You're not on your own, though. IEEE USA staffers Helen Hall and Daryl Griffin will work with you to schedule your webinar and will provide training so you can use the technology comfortably when you're ready to do your own. Now, I know this is a recorded webinar, but if you were participating live right now, I would encourage you to use the chat tool to enter any questions or comments that you have, directing them either to me or to everyone. You see in the chat box that there is a little note from Helen encouraging questions and pointing out that they'd be answered at the end. Sometimes you will prefer to answer questions as they come, but most often you'll want to make sure that you've covered all the content before you go on a sidetrack with some questions that may not be right on track. So since you are participating not live, I'm going to ask you to jot down questions as they come to you, and just in case we need to cover some things in the future or you want to contact me after this to get those questions answered. Well, let's start by thinking about why you might want to do a webinar. Webinars are part of an online revolution that's been taking place in recent years. They have some drawbacks, and if you've participated in a webinar that had some problems, the sound wasn't clear or there were some technical bandwidth problems, you know there are some drawbacks. But the tangible benefits for using webinars far outweigh these. Let's think for a bit together about what are these tangible benefits. First one is easy access. Your participants can join a webinar from almost anywhere, home, office, coffee shop, airport, anywhere they are that they can get online, they can join a webinar. Similar to easy access, related to that, is broad reach. Since participants can log in anywhere they have a web connection, you may get participants from around the globe. You are likely to reach many more people or many different people using a webinar than you would be using other kinds of communication. A very important part of the advantages of a webinar is the cost advantage. Webinars tend to be very inexpensive, relatively inexpensive for the host, but even more so for participants. They save travel costs, and typically webinars are either free or very low cost, especially compared to other seminars, workshops, or meetings. A well-done webinar will have very high impact. In fact, some research has shown that online learning may even have longer retention value than other methods of sharing information. And part of this is because webinars are reusable. The impact of a webinar does not end with a single showing. If you record them, as IEEE USA does, they are reusable. People who may not be able to participate in the initial program can join in the recorded version at their own leisure. Now, since you're not online, and so that I can actually ask and answer questions, I still want you to make sure that you have a pad and pencil handy so that you can write down tips, ideas, anything that you think of as you go. This will enhance your learning. We're going to talk more about how to use the interaction tools a little later on. Right now, though, I want to ask you to think about a specific question. Why do you want to learn more about webinars? How will you use the information that's in this webinar? As you write, let me just suggest that some of you have specific plans for completing a webinar with a target group pretty soon. Others are just concerned with, this is something I hear about, maybe I'll want to use it someday. Regardless of how you'll be using it, it's important for you to think about just what it is that you will use this information for. Now, let's think about more specifically about what you're going to get from this webinar. That might help you change or increase or even answer some of the questions that you have about how you would use it. You're going to explore some tips to engage your audience. We know that technology enhances some communication, but sometimes people who are participating in webinars look kind of like the guy on the bottom of the screen here. They are asleep on the job or multitasking. So we want to do things that help your audience stay engaged with you rather than with other things. And some of these are also ways that you'll enliven the presentation. Appealing to different ways that people think and learn, using different kinds of graphics, all of those things help make it a little livelier presentation than it might otherwise have been. We will spend a little bit of time looking at some keys for effective slides. You've all seen slide presentations that were very ho-hum, or you go, oh, couldn't they just send me the slides? On the other hand, very good slides provide memory markers, especially with their visuals. So we'll spend some time with that, but we'll spend even more time thinking about you, because you are the heart of any webinar presentation. And we want to talk with you about how you can present for the highest level of impact. Well, even before you decide that you want to do a webinar, there are some questions to ask. Maybe a webinar is not the very best solution for you. So we want to ask some questions to help you determine if you really want to do this presentation as a webinar. Is it the most appropriate way to distribute the information that you have to your target group? Remember, you'll only engage your audience if you have targeted people who truly can gain from participating in your online presentation. Ask yourself the questions that you see on the screen here. Why would I want to do this? What do I want participants to leave knowing or being able to do or understanding differently? And why would these people be interested in my webinar? When you've thought a little bit about these questions, then take a moment and pretend that you're one of your audience members, not the presenter, but somebody on the other end of the screen. What would keep you interested, engaged in the webinar? So you need to be certain that webinars are the best solution for you. Then ask yourself the next question. It's a process question. How am I going to move people from wherever they are at the beginning of the webinar, what do they already know, understand, believe, or expect, to where I want them to be at the end of the webinar? We want to be clear that your content is going to move them and advance their knowledge, information, beliefs, understanding, or even skills from where they are to where you want them to be. This means that you need to know a little bit about what they already know or what they want to know. And we'll come back to some of the tools to help you increase this understanding a little later on. But I want you to be thinking about what is it that led your audience to sign up for your webinar. Think about this and ask them, interact with them about this early in the program. You can do this by inserting a poll or asking them to enter ideas into the chat box. Find out about their experience with the subject that you're talking about. The question that was asked to you at the beginning of this webinar before we actually began is an example of a question about participant experience. We wanted to find out a little bit about what you already knew or how you preferred webinars to go. If you ask people a question, make sure, however, that you don't just make it an exercise and ignore it. You need to pay attention to the information you get. Comment on it and let participants see how it shapes the rest of the program. Even though I don't have information from you right now, what I might say is if people had entered information into the chat box, I might say, oh, it looks like some of you have had some really good experiences with webinars, and you have a lot of tips for what makes them good. We want to make sure that everyone pays attention to these, and we'll build on them as we go through this meeting. So this means, unfortunately maybe, I think it is fortunate though, that even though you're thoroughly prepared for your webinar, you also need to be flexible. Something that you need to think about as you are preparing your webinar is how people are going to take in and use the information. A few years back, Ned Herman, who was a physicist, scientist, as well as a researcher who had a deep understanding of people, created a model based on his research for how people think, how they take in and use information. Your participants are going to be people all across the map that is in Ned's whole brain model. People will be in the A quadrant, which is looking for logical, analytical, fact-based, quantitative information. These participants are going to want to know, what's the bottom line of this presentation? I want to know, give me the facts. If there's some theory behind it, might even want to hear some about that. But these are people who want to have time to think it through and to know that this is good, sound information. Another set of participants are going to be those that are in the green quadrant, the green part of the model just below the blue, and they're going to be paying attention to how well planned your webinar is. They want the information to be organized, for the sequence to make sense to them, for it to be easy to follow. Still another group, and these are in the C or red part of the model, are going to want to know how they and others might respond themselves to the message that you're delivering. If you're announcing changes or introducing information that might create concern, you'll hear it first from this group. This same group will be most interested in interacting with you and using the tools that are on the webinar to interact with you and with other participants. Notice here that the word feelings by the C in this quadrant, in this model, is something that scientists and engineers often say, oh, well, that's not where we want to go. We have found, though, that even though this may not be the first preference, there is a large group of people across occupations who really want the kinesthetic, interpersonal aspects to be dominant in information. Finally, let's move to thinking about those in the D or future part of the model. These are people whose minds are racing. They're always wanting to ask questions, to integrate, to synthesize, to understand how things relate to each other. They want you to move more quickly through the information because they are moving quickly. So we've got people who are focused on the facts, the form, the feelings, and the future. But remember that regardless of the questions that these people might ask, everyone who participates in your webinar is going to hear your information through different filters based on their own brain thinking styles. Well, if you're feeling a little overwhelming, if this sounds like a lot to keep in mind, remember that everything you do to prepare is like putting something into a bank account. You're preparing for your information. You're making an investment in the success of your presentation. And the payoff will be connecting with your audience. And we think that's definitely worth it. Now, I want you to pay attention to the picture on this slide. You may be asking, what does that have to do with doing a webinar or a presentation? Well, presentations are not like skydiving necessarily, so why this picture? It's another chance to engage you in thinking about just how things link together. How would a presentation, a webinar, and a skydiver actually connect? In a live webinar, I would ask people to go to the chat tool on the side of their screens and post ideas about what they know about this, or what they believe, what they think. You may even want to do this on the notepads that you're keeping. After giving people a few minutes to do this and commenting on some of the information as it comes in, I might summarize with something like, well, as I see from your comments, you know that both call for careful planning, maybe having some really good tools to use, and a bit of risk-taking along the way. So this is all a part of trying to understand more clearly how can you engage people in your webinar even though you aren't able to see them face-to-face. Well, an answer to this is another question about what are the opportunities that some features of the presentation software have to offer to help us connect with our audience. Let's take a look at some of those. First, we encourage you to show yourself. You saw a picture of me at the beginning of this webinar. That gave you a visual of who's talking to you. It helps maintain interest because you have a sense of, oh yeah, I know who this person is. If you're comfortable using a webcam and have access to that, that's certainly a great way to show yourself. But at least make sure that people see a photo or have some biographical information about you. Tell them who you are. Then we've talked a number of times about the chat room. The chat feature is one that's reserved far too often just for questions. But we like to use it as a tool to help people interact with the information that we're giving and with each other if that's appropriate. I might ask for your experience, as we did at the beginning of this webinar. We might ask people to enter into the chat room how many times they've done something. Enter if you've done 5 or more webinars. Chat about what's a great experience that you've had or what are some unfortunate experiences. But use the chat room frequently and with various processes. Another and similar tool to use is the raising hands. There's an icon, and I see that right now Helen has raised her hand here. There's an icon at the bottom of the chat screen below that has a little guy raising his hand. You can raise hands to answer a question. We can say, how many of you? Or to check and see if people need you to pay attention to them in some special ways. There's some other tools there, so explore those as we go through. One of those that's also on the pull-down menu behind the hand raising is a laughter modicum. And as you see that, remember that what we're trying to do is connect. And if people feel like laughing or applauding, encourage them to do that, because this is a quick and simple way to make people connect with you and with each other. An example of this is if you said with the hand raise, now raise your hand if you've ever been bored or lost in a webinar. I guarantee that you'll get a lot of hand raises, and you might even get some laughing. That's a good way to check out the tools. One tool that we really like to use is the poll tool. And the poll lets you put up a question and give some optional answers and let people see just how that works. We have a poll that's just appeared here that says, have you ever done an online webinar? Yes or no? And oh my goodness, we actually have a couple of people who are answering. You see the broadcast results box is checked so that you can see just exactly where your people are on this and spend a little time talking about that. You, as the poll director, can open the poll and have it closed at any time. Sometimes what I like to do to encourage people to go ahead and make their choice is to say, now we're going to leave this poll open until we have at least 50 or 70 or 80% of you that are online having checked in with us. That gives a much more vivid account of where your audience is on things. So strongly encourage you to do that and to close the poll when it's done. Okay, now we've talked about some of the tools. A major tool that you're going to use are the slides that you prepare for your webinar. Since slides are a key part of every webinar, we want to understand that these are truly worth 1,000 words, especially if you have a picture there, because in any communication, you know the old adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words. That's true. And it's as true in engaging an audience in a PowerPoint presentation online as it is in any other situation. So use slides as ways to engage participants, not as a vehicle to keep them from needing to listen. You've probably been in situations, as I have, where you go to a conference or a presentation and you think, oh, everything that they're saying is on the slide. Why didn't they just send me the slides and save me this trouble? Well, there are a number of ways that you can help slides. There are also some very typical problems in using slides. Here are some of the biggest mistakes that I've noticed as people use slides. First one I call death by PowerPoint, and it is using too many slides with too much information on each slide. It's death by PowerPoint. Sometimes we put way too many words on a slide. We put hundreds of words or lots and lots of points. We believe that if we're talking about 18 points, they all need to go on the same slide. Well, it's a judgment call about exactly how many, but there's a rule of thumb that a lot of professionals use, which is the 6 to 8 by 6 to 8. 6 to 8 words per line and 6 to 8 lines per slide. That'll make sure that you avoid having too many if you stay as close to this as possible. Sometimes people just use bullets instead of thoughts. A good use, if you're putting words on your PowerPoint slides, a good use of those slides is to reinforce the information that's being given. So if you're reinforcing information, make sure that all the information shows. You don't want, for example, on this slide, just to have too many words, bullets. You wouldn't know what I was trying to communicate there. And you've been in presentations, most likely, where people actually read the slides instead of letting those just guide the discussion. Remember, the slides are not the focal point. They are tools to help things move quickly. So we've used slides. People often believe that they have to use some clip art or other things as a way of changing up their slides from just words. Well, particularly when you're dealing with scientists and engineers, they like graphics. Use the charts that are available in your PowerPoint software to make connections between your thoughts graphically. In the case up here, you might have said, there are 3 reasons to pay attention to these slides. 1, and you'd give the information there. 2, and then there's some more information. And 3, and finally, in conclusion, here's the last point that I wanted to make. So you can visually help them see the 1, 2, 3, and particularly people who are very logical and analytical like to see numbers and graphics in the presentation. Pay attention to that. But as I said in the beginning, the key thing in any presentation, in any webinar, is the presenter. Let's turn our attention now to the most important part of this webinar, and that's you. If this statement or thinking about actually delivering a webinar makes you nervous, this might be a good time to raise your hand or put a little hash mark on the pad that you're using to capture information here. Get rid of that feeling. Don't let anticipating delivering the material make you nervous, because following some tips that we're about to give and have given can increase both your competence and your confidence. The first thing to remember is that you don't have to remember. Even if you know the content like the back of your hand, you should have a script. A script will help you control any anxiety that comes and ensures that you actually cover all the points that you want to cover in an orderly, succinct way. When not using a script, presenters may tend to ramble, wander, get distracted by a thought that pops into their head instead of sticking to the format. This would be particularly distracting to those in the thinking style that is looking for planning and sequencing. So prepare a script, and with your script, rehearse. Rehearse. You rehearse to build confidence and ensure that your program actually works, to have a chance to refine anything that doesn't come out right. And I know in preparing this, I've gone through it several times, and each time I've changed something. And that's not just because I'm an inveterate tinkerer, which I am, but it's also because I found things that, oh, yeah, I think I could make that work better. So you need to rehearse and need to know when it's good enough. Another purpose of rehearsing is to get the timing down. If you've ever been online with a presentation or even in a meeting for that matter, where they say, oh, and we've got about 3 more minutes, so I need to rush through the rest of this material, you know how frustrating that can be. So prepare the timing as you rehearse. As you rehearse, you may find that the timing is less than the announced time that was set for the webinar. If it's an hour webinar and your timing shows that it's 35 or 45 minutes or so, don't worry. The gift of time is never distressing to participants unless there's some material that they still want covered. So you might want to use any extra time that you have to make sure that all the questions are covered, or even to have additional dialogue among participants and with yourself. So rehearse so that you can talk conversationally without reading the script, because, as we've said, it is all about you. I'm going to give you a few more tips here to make your presentation even more effective. One of those is to have more than one voice available in the webinar. It's not always practical or even sometimes possible to have multiple voices, but when you can, we encourage you to do that. And I think, Helen, are you online now? Because what I'd like to do is to demonstrate this by asking Helen a question. Helen, what would you say makes a webinar presenter sound professional? You're a staffer who's had lots of experience with this, so what would you say?
Peggy, I think the key is rehearsal. And presenters should not only rehearse the presentation on their own time, but also when the IEEE USA webinar team sets up their training session, they should be prepared to go through that entire presentation. And during the presentation, they should also plan for participant interaction, because what I've noticed over the years is that when you have participant interaction, it brings a certain amount of energy to the presentation. It just makes for a better presentation.
Great, thank you. You may have noticed here that changing voices not only gives us good information and a different point of view, but it alerts your brain and your ears to paying more attention, because you have to adjust to different ranges, different intonation from the additional speaker. Even though technology for built-in microphones has greatly improved, it's a good idea to use a headset if you have a good one available. This filters out background noise and improves the quality of the transmission. No matter where you are, there is likely to be some background noise that might pop up during the webinar if you don't carefully control this. And finally, I can't say this too many times, rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. Sometimes I do this presenting to my cat. My colleagues get tired of hearing it. It's good practice for me, and he doesn't seem to mind too much. But remember, even if you have a script, you don't want to sound canned, so you're not going to read your script. All of these tips help you, even though you have a lot of experience perhaps in leading meetings or guiding seminars, or perhaps even running training sessions. You'll want to use all of these skills that you have from these other interactions, but presenting online is still different. Making a presentation such as a webinar calls for even more of your desire to increase the interaction. You don't have the opportunity to use the visual of yourself that you do in a face-to-face meeting to keep the energy going. So you want to keep people interacting. You want to choose images and graphics that help tell the story, but don't tell the story for you. They tell the story with you. And as you create your slides, you want to put some movement there, not too much. I've been in some presentations where it seems like every word or every letter in the word even had some different kind of animation, and this is distracting. It's overusing a tool instead of focusing on the information and the audience. Well, I hope we haven't raised any anxiety in you so far, but I want to make sure that you understand before we finish this that even if you have perfectionistic tendencies, you probably want to let go of some of that, because we value in doing webinars authenticity far more than perfection. It's not about being perfect. It's about being able to focus on your audience with the information that you have. You want to show your real vulnerable self. We all stumble over a word here or there, move a slide at a time when maybe, oh, I wish I had waited a moment for that. There are things that you can do that will not distract from the presentation so long as you accept it and just keep on going. People understand that we're all people. Remember that you'll need to connect with your audience members over and over again. You're using the online tools to be your eye contact, in doing any presentation. If you've ever had any training or experience in doing live presentations, the value of eye contact in those. Well, using these tools gives you eye contact. It also gives you a little break sometimes from having to be the one on stage. And I want to talk just a moment about using questions. Even though you've had the opportunity to ask questions throughout the presentation, if you had followed Helen's guide at the beginning, we still want to know what else might be on your mind. Always encourage questions. You might hold them to the end, respond along the way, or do a combination of those. But questions provide a way for you to make sure that the needs of your audience have truly been met. And one need of the audience for people who are attending this session, I bet, are, well, how do I actually do it? Well, you do it, but you don't have to do it alone. There's no unchangeable rule about how to manage the logistics, but we encourage you to call on the staff, IEEE USA staff's great experience. One thing that they've learned is that some of the best times to schedule webinars are from 2 to 3 o'clock Eastern Time on Tuesday or Thursday, whenever that's possible. This is going to allow people across the country to sign in because that's when they're most available. There might be even available to schedule a lunch or a early or late lunch break to allow for participation. And don't worry about learning just how to use the webinar software, because the staff is going to help you all along the way. They'll set up a training session for you a few days before the webinar and work with you step by step on how to use all of the tools and make sure that this is the very best webinar that it can be. In addition, webinars are going to be recorded so that as they're archived on IEEE USA's website, others can come and participate in them, even if you don't have everyone that you'd like on the actual presentation. So on the pad that you have now, I want to make sure that you know who these staff people are who are going to be such great help to you. Daryl Griffin, d.r.griffin at IEEE.org, and Helen Hall, h.hall at IEEE.org, are great supports for this. Helen has worked with me on each step of this, and you even heard her voice a minute ago. These are professionals who want to make sure that all of the information that's going out is done in the most professional way. Finally, let's go back through some of the key points of the seminar. I want you to remember that the first thing to ask is, why do I want to do an online presentation? Why do I want to do a webinar? What are the advantages of this that I want to play to? Understanding your audience and how they learn and what they need to learn is the next big piece that we covered in this webinar. As you start presenting your information, we talked about how to use visuals even more than text to tell the story. You're telling the story, reinforce it with text, but make it memorable through some visuals that are there. Make your slides simple and engaging. This one has a lot of words on it, more than I usually put on. I decided that 7 points was not too much to keep us all together here. But you want slides, even those that have a number of words, to have some way of engaging other parts of the brain. And that's where my graphic at the top comes in. Use tools to keep people connected and engaged. I think we've talked a lot about the tools that the Adobe software makes available to you. Don't hesitate to learn, practice, and use them. And while you're practicing, prepare a script. Practice it on your own and with staff. Most of all, don't be overly concerned and anxious and nervous. Be yourself. You're there not because you are a professional webinar presenter, but because you have some content and a role in IEEE that means you're the right one to deliver this to the audience. So, you may still have questions, comments, or want to have some more interaction. I wanted you to have some contact information for me. My email is kind of a long one. It's p_Hutchison@OdysseyGroupInc, that's my company, .com, or phone 404-943-0313. I close by wishing you the very best of luck, and I hope I learn a lot from webinars that you'll put online soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy.
Okay. You think this one's a go?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I feel good about it.
Yeah, me too.